Hello and welcome to episode 217 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about quite a few upsets in the CDL this past weekend. Some matches that you literally could not ever explain to someone with any logical sense. Just a bunch of BS going around the league, which we will obviously get into on this show. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Think you summed it up pretty nicely. It was just a absolutely wacky week of CDL matches, and I don't think we need to waste any time. I'm pretty speechless, but I think we'll have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I don't know if we thought we would have much to talk about on this show when we made these predictions for the show, because we agreed on most of them. I think, we disagreed on like maybe three matches, and most of them were like between two teams where like, well, neither of them are any good and you could see this going either way. Those matches were not the ones that really stood out. We will get to it in very quick order, but the first one was Carolina and Boston on Friday, and we disagreed on that match. Obviously, you said you'd sworn off Carolina and the Royal Ravens. I told you that would bite you in the ass, and it certainly did this week. You had to pick the Boston Breach as a result of that pledge, and it was close. Obviously, Boston had the two chances to win this series. They win the opening hard point, they win the overload, they lose a round 11 in the first S&D. And that is kind of their undoing, because Carolina gets to mat 4 and just starts cruising. Looks more like the Carolina that we had come to expect going into Major 1. They end up winning this series 3-2. And really, it looks really bad for Boston at this point. We will talk about how it kind of turned around later in the week. But what did you think of this Royal Ravens win?
Yeah, especially given the context of what eventually happens. I my potentially over dramatic comments in the notes might look a little different because those are a couple days earlier. But first impressions from Spart was, he absolutely fried, dropped a 1.43 KD, 106 kills overall, most in the series, best KD in the series. Next highest kills was 84 from Nero, so he was 22 kills over the next closest person in this particular series. Um, it, like you said, Boston did almost make a comeback in the game two search. If they pulled that off, then they probably 3-0 this series. But especially after Boston win the overload 4-0, where Exceed goes 8-22, Carolina just rebounds and pretty much completely dominates the next two maps of this series. So um was basically a must win for Carolina, just given the state of how they had looked recently and given the expectations for Boston coming in with a new player. Um, but yeah, I think overall the one thing I did want to note, and that really stood out to me in this series outside of Spart individually, was in map one. And I don't know if it was just because I haven't paid super close attention to a ton of Boston listen-ins this year or what, but it felt like to me in the map one listen-in with Boston that Purge was like, it felt like to me he was like going out of his way to almost like handhold Snoopy and tell him what to do. Like it was like hit this with me, and like I can't remember it at the time. I was like really like I went back and listened to the listen in a second time because I was like kind of just like what was that? It just seemed weird to me, and it could be the communication style that works for Boston. Granted, given Boston's lack of success, I'm not entirely sure that's the right way to phrase it, but um it something just seemed like, I don't even know if it really was weird, but it just like whatever I was listening to in that listen in, it jumped out to me in a way that it felt like Purge in particular was trying to like basically tell Snoopy what to do and hold his hand and be like, okay, let's do this together. And like you can probably say that's really good communication and like a next step forward in communication to make sure you're on the same page with someone. But it might have, I might just be biased and tripping a little bit in terms of evaluating that listen-in. But like I said, I can't remember too many other Boston listen-ins that season that stood out to me. For whatever reason, this one, I was like, I heard it at the time and I was just like, it kind of was just like, I was like, did that just happen? And like I said, I had to go back and listen again. And it was a little strange to me in that sense. And it could have also been in part Snoopy was really struggling in map one. Um, so maybe that was like Purge's way as a potential vocal leader on this team, especially without in the first series for these guys without Cammy. Maybe he was like trying to go the extra mile to step up and be that potential vocal leader for this team. Um, there's a lot of things that could have been going on, and it's also possible Purge like saw Snoopy was struggling and he was just trying to get him on the same page. Maybe like Purge was trying to do something with him and bait a little bit for Snoopy to get Snoopy ignited and catch a little fire, and maybe that could have been a recipe for success. So either way, I'm not going to be overcritical of it. It definitely stood out to me and was something I wanted to make sure I brought up because, like I said, not sure how many Boston listen-ins have been memorable for me in recent years or even this season, but this one definitely stood out to me.
Yeah, I think if they win this series or if they 3-0, because they very well could have, I think that listen in is, you could almost turn it into a positive. It's like, if you're on the winning side, certain aspects of communication or whatever, that can always be looked at as like, that's the reason that they won. And then when they lose, then you can look at it and say, well, that's the reason that they lost. It's because of Snoopy. Obviously, Snoopy did not have a good series like whatsoever in this series. Like, he had a horrible game one. He had probably his only good map was game two, and then like game five he dropped a breadstick. So like that was not great for the Boston Breach. But I want to loop in that second match for Boston because like all of this is great. Like, this is great context to talk about, especially when Boston is losing, as they have been quite a lot recently. And then we get to their second match of the week. They play the first match on Friday, and then they played earlier today against FaZe Vegas. Map 1 of that series looked exactly like what we saw in Map 4 and Map 5 of their series against Carolina. Just completely one-way traffic. Boston put up very little fight, 250 to 77, 100-point club. Looks like Boston is going to get just thrown off the map. Super easy sweep for FaZe. Then map 2, 6-3 Boston. Map 3, 3-2 Boston. Map 4, 250 to 183 Boston. The Boston Breach, who I believe had lost like 5 matches in a row or something like that to this point. They've been one of the worst teams in the entire league over the past month. Like, they've had some good moments, but a lot of not so good moments. And they beat FaZe Vegas, who just finished third at Major 1, and is now looking like, you were kind of joking, but it very much is not necessarily a joke, that there's a chance that they don't make it to Major 2 just because how poorly they have played. It's very realistic that Boston and FaZe will be those two teams that don't make it to Major 2, which would be very funny. But this is like one of the most shocking series. I can't say it's the most shocking because we do have something else to talk about this weekend, but how do you kind of view this series, this FaZe Boston match, considering we just talked about Boston really kind of throwing away a series against Carolina, who have not been very good since Major 1?
I'm gonna try and hold the FaZe specific stuff as long as I can for when we talk about them more in depth. But from a Boston perspective, I mean, this is I think you word for word said like they basically, or you said they I don't remember what you said. I'm already losing it, but basically it was like Boston stole a win from FaZe here, and like that there is not many possibilities of people even considering Boston coming away with this heading into the series. let alone after FaZe 100-point club them in map 1. And then even after map 2, Boston wins a search, and I'm sitting here watching it, and I'm like, all right, it's just a search. They just 100-point club them. They'll take care of business in the respawns, get a 3-1 win, and that'll be it for FaZe. No big deal. But the fact Boston were able to capitalize on FaZe when they are seemingly in a bit of a slump again, credit to them. They were able to take advantage of the opportunity. Spart played really well again, led the lobby in KD at a 1.22, just ahead of Simps 1.21. Tied with Nasty for the most kills on Boston at 79, both below Simp, who had the most at 86. But still, I mean, one thing that we mentioned, because I know I brought it up when we were talking about Spart to Boston, was I felt like just the one-person move, despite all of Spart's success in challengers this year, I didn't really think this was going to move the needle much for Boston. I said the same thing when Exceed was brought into the fold for Carolina. But, I mean, this, at least in a small sample size, Spart has really turned things around for Boston and just injected some life into them. And even though they didn't get the win against Carolina earlier in the week, you could argue both of these series were potentially more competitive than they might have been if the team hadn't made the roster change. So for Boston, this is a massive win, massive in terms of potential tiebreakers for the major 2 qualifiers. If Boston and FaZe somehow end up with the same record, Boston's got the head-to-head win over FaZe, and that could really shake things up. And yeah, I was kind of joking, but like you said, it's not entirely impossible for FaZe to not make it to major 2. That would just be absolutely ludicrous, and I can't even imagine that actually happening. But the way things have gone for FaZe lately, it's not totally unthinkable at this point. So really, really good win for Boston. Massive shout out to Spart for his performance throughout this week. Really happy for him that he was able to play this well, and especially coming into a team that, like we said, hadn't really shown many signs of life in recent matches, and then he's able to come in with his success, brand new squad, limited practice, and beat one of the quote unquote top teams in some people's eyes. That just shout out Spart, massive performance for him.
Yeah, I wish I could just give a bunch of props to Boston and kind of leave it at that, but this is so much of a FaZe loss than a Boston win. Like I know Boston, you have to shoot back, you have to do certain things to win a map, but we've talked about it before. Teams like FaZe and LAT and OpTic and Paris, who we'll get to, they should not lose very many, if any, matches to teams that they are so much more talented than. And that is obviously the case here with FaZe. They have half of the Vancouver Surge roster that went to a ton of grand finals last year. And then they have Simp and Draza on this team versus, we just talked about it, like Spart, we were not incredibly high on him coming into this roster for the breach. It didn't feel like it was going to make much of a difference. And that was because Boston, just in general, has not been very good. I looked it up. Boston started the season 2-0, and then in their 11 matches, they won 2 of those matches. And then they played FaZe, and they beat FaZe. So, I wish I could just praise Boston and say, man, look at them. And how much the Spart roster change kind of helped them, considering they went to a Game 5 of Carolina and then they beat FaZe. But I just look at this as FaZe is in trouble. They have some really serious issues, and obviously that's the next match on Friday. It was the second match on the first day of this weekend, was FaZe versus Falcons, and FaZe lost this series as well. It was much closer, I would say, in some respect, because the hard point was a 30-point hard point for the Falcons, but Falcons could have crushed them in that map. Then FaZe wins pretty. Oh, my light falling down, trying to get away from how bad FaZe is. But FaZe dominated the S&D, and then Falcons were just much better than FaZe Vegas was in those last 2 maps. They almost 100-point clubbed them in map 4, 250 to 102. How many times has FaZe even been in remote jeopardy to be 100 point clubbed? It's probably, you can count it on one hand over the years how many times that has happened. So when you kind of combine this loss, this 3-1 loss with Falcons, then the 3-1 loss to Boston later in the week, and you add on the fact that they lost last weekend to the Riyadh Falcons, and they lost last weekend to the Minnesota G2 Minnesota. 3 losses in a row for FaZe. Again, how many times in the CDL era has FaZe, whether it be Atlanta or Vegas, lost 3 matches in a row that weren't like, LAN matches or something, like, losing in the winners finals or the losers finals, So how do you kind of view this FaZe losing streak in the context of these 2 losses this week?
According to Money Hill Stats on Twitter, this was only the 3rd time in CDL history that FaZe have lost 3 series in a row.
Yeah.
I think that speaks volumes in itself of just exactly what's going on here, and in terms of the severity of the apparent presence of issues for FaZe. Whatever they are, I really am still kind of confused exactly how this is happening. I even said it last week. I've joked about it the last couple weeks, and I know I joked about it in the last episode. I said we're both going to go with FaZe 2-0 this week, and they're going to end up going 1-1 because that's what's happened the last 2 weeks before this. And I was wrong because they didn't go 1-1. They went 0-2. So I really am just at a loss for words in terms of exactly what's going on with FaZe right now, and looping in that the end of the Boston FaZe series from today. Simp was literally standing up at his monitor. You couldn't even see the top half of him or his face, and you could just tell from like his arm gestures and stuff that he was like kind of like going on a little bit of a rant after losing to Boston. I don't know how many times I've ever seen that from Simp. And we just said 3rd time ever that FaZe have lost 3 series in a row, so it's the 3rd time ever that Simp has ever lost 3 series in a row in his entire professional career, which is pretty crazy to think about. But yeah, this Falcon series, I mean, to give FaZe some credit, at least they definitely made Falcons earn the map 1 victory, in the sense of they they were up 92 to 2, 171 to 46, so that's over 130 points, and then Falcons only win by 30. So FaZe did show some fight towards the end of that map, and I started to think at that time, I was like, damn, FaZe might actually pull this off. They did look pretty solid in the search. There was one interesting moment where Cell was in a smoke with 3 FaZe guys, and he got 2 knife kills, and the animation looked like it went off for the 3rd swing of his knife, but then I think it was Abuza who got the kill just in time to avoid one of possibly the craziest 1v3 knife only clutches in CDL history. But really, I mean, one name that I feel like we have talked a ton about on multiple occasions in terms of Falcons, but it feels like in a more positive light, we've talked about him recently when it comes to Falcons, is Xnid, and he dropped 41 kills in map 1, 26 in the overload, 32 in the second hard point where they come 3 points away from a 100-point club. I mean, at this point, Xnid 1.36 KD in the series, 103 kills overall. The next closest is Pred with 85. So I mean, it's a little similar to the numbers I was reading off for Spart, but not even joking. Xnid's played like the MVP for Falcons of late in my eyes, and I also remember joking about Falcons. They started 0-2, and I said they started 0-2 in the Major 1 qualifier, so now they're just gonna. They started 0-2, won 5 in a row to get that 1 seed for Major 1. Now they start 0-2 in the Major 2 qualifiers. They're going to rattle off 9 wins in a row and finish 9-2 for these qualifiers. And it's actually, within grasp, which is pretty crazy. And I think got to shout out Xnid for the way he's played, just completely from entering the season as a potential question mark or wild card, X factor, however you want to phrase it, to playing like a legit all-star caliber candidate or an MVP candidate even for this team when he's surrounded by other MVPs and all-star caliber players and world champions. It's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, and I think we had a lot of conversations about like should he be in that spot and then drop Xnid, and that would just be kind of a ludicrous thing to do at this point where Xnid has played so well and been a real key to success for the Falcons, and they won 5 of the Major 1 qualifiers. They're on their way to winning at least a majority of the Major 2 qualifiers, it seems, and that just is pretty incredible. Considering how much he has been slandered just been in general last season especially, but this season as well. That makes for the Falcons, they are on, like you said, they've won 4 matches in a row now, right? And FaZe...
This says they're 3-3, so
3
I
and 3.
must have missed. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I was trying to look at their
Yeah.
COD Gamepedia. Yeah, so before this though they had they were 3-2 after this match, but FaZe is the real killer because if you look at their kind of schedule this season, so they lose that opener against LAT, and then we got really hyped up because they beat Paris, Toronto, OpTic all in a row. They won those 3 matches. They beat C9, and then they go into their battle with Minnesota. They lose that match. And since then have only beaten Vancouver, Boston, Falcons. They beat LAT. They beat Minnesota once. They beat Toronto. They beat Vancouver. And other than that, they have lost 4 of their last 7, I want to say. They've lost to Miami, Minnesota, Falcons, Paris. It's not looking great for FaZe. Obviously they're not in like the dire condition that a team like C9 was in or that Boston was in or whatever, but we've talked about it many times before that we just hold them to a different standard. They're a championship team. If they're not competing for championships at the very least, then it's a failure in every respect. Same with LAT, same with FaZe. Paris is now in that group as well. Losing to teams, I could understand losing to Falcons, but this was like a pretty decisive win for Falcons. Like you said, that hard point, it could have been a completely like one-sided hard point win again for Falcons, which would have been 2 in 1 series. The only win being the S&D for FaZe. So there's something off about FaZe, and I don't know what it is. Like they go through this every year or so, but this feels a little bit different. I also think because the fact that they signed a Luka as a substitute. Granted, I don't know what the status is now. I don't know if that's even close to happening at this point, but I want to just put it out there that they don't typically, last year or 2-3 years ago, they're not signing a substitute no matter how good the player is because they believe in Celium, they believe in Synth, they believe in Abizi, they believe in Draza. Like those are their guys. They're going to stick with them. It doesn't feel like that at this point with FaZe, and I think that's pretty damning considering how long they stuck with that trio that they had for 5 or 6 years. So now we're in a different place in the FaZe era. And that should be pretty scary for FaZe fans just in general. Real quick, shout out Hobalicious and Virus in the chat. But what were we gonna say?
I was just gonna say that I think that's a good segue into potentially the next part of this conversation is do we think FaZe needs to make a roster change right now? And I think that's, in my view, I think that's a 2-part answer. Do I think they need to? I think it's very possible that they need to. Will they? I don't see them making a change right now. And I do think, given the history you just alluded to and stuff, that makes a ton of sense in drawing the comparisons to having that trio stick together for so long and then finally pulling the trigger on a change to then make that such a massive change with FaZe and then blow it up, or even just change one player a couple months in, that would just seem very weird to me. I do have to say, I feel like 04, it seems weird to say like 04 has been inconsistent. I feel like that's uh, the running conversation in the community at this point. I would argue he's actually been consistent, but he's just been consistently lackluster and struggling in a lot of these maps. So I don't know what they could actually do if Aluka like was actually the substitute for this FaZe team and was a viable SMG. I do think on one of his most recent challengers teams he was running an SMG, but I still don't think he's viewed as like a full-time SMG. If they had a full-time SMG as a sub and they went into this week and were just trying to uh, practice or do some scrims with a sub in place of 04, that wouldn't shock me. I still don't know if FaZe would actually pull the trigger on a change right now at this particular moment, but it is, in my view, like it's scary to be in this spot for FaZe, because like we said at the top of the section, only the third time they've ever lost 3 series in a row in CDL history. So there are factually, there have been very few times where this has even been a conversation. And just on that note, I remember one off the top of my head was the start of last year. They started 03, right, before the holiday break, and then they went on to win the minor. So we were fully discussing a roster change potentially being a possibility for the FaZe team last year at that point in the season. And again, that was earlier than this in the season. So at least at 2 out of the 3 times that FaZe have ever lost 3 series in a row in CDL history, we have at least brought up the notion that they might have to contemplate making a roster change. That's kind of crazy to like say out loud and think about in terms of like the expectations for FaZe.
And in that specific case last year, they could, and I'm sure did, reason with the fact that it was the beginning of the season. Sometimes you don't have as great of a start as you would like, and you have this break. You have a month off to practice, to get ready, and then by the time that they got back from break, they were one of, if not the best team. I believe they won Major 1 after that poor start. But this is a completely different situation. They went through Major 1. They lost the first match of the season. Then they went on a win streak, and then they went through some trials and tribulations, both right before Major 1 and during Major 1. And we've seen it since Major 1 that it hasn't looked great. And you don't have that break. You don't have like a month off. Like conversely, you literally have no break. You have 4 more weeks of qualifiers, and then you have Major 2. So like there really isn't kind of, I guess, a light at the end of the tunnel, or like a way to get off of this ramp at this point. But I want to say, like, and obviously we're not going to talk about these matches on this episode. We'll talk about it on next episode. But their next 2 are like, they're going to be illustrative of like what is going to happen with this roster. They play LAT and they play OpTic. If they lose both those matches, they're going to make a roster change. I'm almost positive that. Like if that means that they would be on a 4-match losing streak or a 5-match losing streak, they will be like 3-6 in these qualifiers, something like that. Like they'll be
2-6.
They
2-4 right now.
Like they will literally be in danger of what you just said, of like not getting to Major 2. Like that is like, that's really crazy. And on top of that, they won't be competitive with the teams that they have historically been competitive with, which was a factor. We talked about it extensively about why Kenny got dropped from LAT and should have got dropped by LAT, because it's not only that they were losing matches that they shouldn't have, but they weren't competitive with the teams that they were always used to competing with. They weren't beating OpTic as consistently as they should. They weren't beating FaZe as consistently, Toronto and Paris, and they weren't a championship contender anymore. And if FaZe is 2-6 after 4 weeks of qualifiers online, when they played the teams like Boston and Vancouver and stuff like that, then like it's over. Like there's no way to come out of that. I think at that point, like the roster that they have really built is kind of a failed project. And that's incredible to say, honestly, because that's really never happened for FaZe in the CDL era. Even when you looked at that team, again, every time I talk about FaZe, my light starts to fall down, which, I mean, maybe it's some bad voodoo. Maybe they need to get a shaman in there or something. But literally, if you look at that first year in 2020, they were the best CDL team, like all throughout the regular season. Now, of course, they lose to Dallas in the grand finals, but they finish first seed and everything. That second season, they wipe everybody off the map. Like, nobody can touch them. The next year, that's when they silver surf the entire year. But like, even then, they're getting to grand finals all the time. I think the next year is Slasher. They win one of those majors. You could tell, like, in 2022 and 2023, something was off. Like, it did not look like the same FaZe. Something had really changed for the worst. But even then, they were competitive. 2024, they bring in Draza. I'm pretty sure that's the year that they just started stomping OpTic every few weeks. And, and then, last year they were competitive, of course. So, like, this year, it's not the same. Like, for a 3-week stretch, we were like, they're the best team. Maybe 2 weeks, we were like, they're the best team. And since then, it's been like, what the hell's going on with FaZe? Why can't they beat Minnesota? And now this is more concerning. It's like, why are they losing to the Boston Breach? Like, there's just no reason for that to happen. We talked about it when the Falcons played Boston. Like, Selim had lost however many times against the Breach in his career. It was like once or twice in his career, which goes to show, like, FaZe had not lost to Boston very many times at all, and now they lose this one. So I think a roster change could be coming. It is not nearly, I guess, as set in stone in my mind as something like Kenny, where that always felt like that was the natural conclusion. As soon as they signed him, it felt like there was no way that he was going to make it out of the season on that roster. With FaZe, it comes down to what some of the people in chat are talking about, like, Mixins, he said, I don't think they need to, but I don't think Luka is CDL ready. And I think we both agree. Like, we're not obviously keeping up with challengers very often, but the fact that he got dropped from a challengers roster is pretty interesting, considering how hyped he was when he got signed by FaZe. And they have a really talented team, and that on paper, that team should be able to compete with everybody, and they should be able to beat everybody at least on any given day, and that's just not the case at this point, which always makes it very difficult. We've talked about it before with OpTic. We've talked about it before with LAT. When you make those changes, obviously you want to make a change, but what change can you actually make that's going to actually improve your team? And we've seen it with LAT that bringing in Neum so far has worked to an extent. We'll see if it works long term. I don't think there's a Mercules out there for FaZe to, I think that's what they were hoping with the Luka. Maybe that's the thought process if they bring him in, is just like, let's just roll the dice here and see if it works out for us.
It is kind of ironic. This is obviously first UK tournament in a while. Maybe there are some visa issues that pop up that lead to Merc Jr. stamping his name on the seed. Yeah,
they just hide Draza's his passport. It's like, I don't know, man. I guess we'll just use Luka here. I want to just shout out the guys in the YouTube chat because popping. So obviously Vera's, he said, first time watcher here. Keep doing what you're doing. No matter what the community needs, more podcasts and publicity within the space. Only up here from here, boys. Mission said, love what you are doing. Justin said, definitely should make a change as regard to FaZe. And and Mixon just said, I wouldn't say the Neum thing has worked because they didn't play anyone good when they did, they lost 1-3. I mean, it's a good point. I think at this point they're just gonna let it roll for a little bit. They don't really have any other option. I think Nasty is probably, if now Boston is feeling good probably now, so they're like, yeah, we're definitely not getting rid of Nasty. But LAT doesn't really have a ton of ways to get out of the situation that they put themselves in, and I will go to my grave saying that just letting Ghosty walk away is one of the craziest things that a team has done in quite a while in the CDL, and replace him with Kenny, who was literally got dropped mid-season last year. Is just a crazy way to break up a roster that looked like a championship contender going into the back fifth of the season last year. So yeah, it's going to be interesting what FaZe does or does not do, and we're going to have to keep a really close eye on them as we move forward. But this next match on Friday, the last match, I mean, that's why I said FaZe losing to Boston's like one of the biggest upsets. Like this legitimately, and I'm not being hyperbolic, could be the biggest upset in CDL history. I don't remember any other CDL match happening where I'm like, there is no way, absolutely no way, that this one team beats the other team and then they end up winning that match. And that's exactly what happened here between the Paris Gentlemates and Cloud9 New York. We should say C9 dropped their entire roster after Major 1. They replaced them with 4 guys who had never touched a CDL server in their lives. They were playing their first CDL matches to start the Major 2 qualifiers, and we have consistently and rightfully compared them to the Vegas Falcons roster to start last season when it was the all-Saudi team that could barely win maps. They weren't winning any series, and we, again, rightfully questioned whether C9 with this iteration of their roster would be able to win a series against a CDL team. And we talked about it with Vegas last year. We never say never because that's crazy to think about. Like, you can't get lucky in one match to win one match if you have 20 tries at it. Vegas did test those odds, to be honest. And C9, they had looked decent in some regards. And you mentioned, I want to shout you out because you said the fact that they won an S&D map, I think last week, was like, oh, that's kind of crazy. The fact because they had just been together for 2 weeks. And then it really comes to roost here where they play Paris. Paris obviously won Major 1. They were definitively the best team in the league, considering they beat OpTic in the grand finals. But C9 wins map 1 here. They very importantly win map 2, 6-3 S&D. And then Paris looks like they're going to reverse sweep. They dominate Overload. They win a pretty competitive hard point. And then C9 wins their second S&D of this series, 6-3 against Paris, and again, potentially the biggest upset ever in CDL history. Do you agree with that kind of characterization of this kind of upset?
I agree it's got to be up there. One match that immediately comes to mind for me, although it was on LAN, was when Seattle Surge beat FaZe at the last major of Cold War. I can't remember if that was a 5 or 4 major season. I want to say it was 5.
Because that was the Minnesota Miracle.
Okay, so that was legit, like, that was Seattle's champs at that point because they were already eliminated from champs. And it was a standoff S&D. Nikki D popped off, if I remember correctly. That's where it started the meme of, like, Nikki D owning FaZe and all that. So that was one of the bigger upsets I remember at a LAN tournament. Especially for an online match here. We have, since this amateur filled Cloud9 roster was put together, we have drawn comparisons, or at least like put them on par and sort of compared them to the all Saudi Falcons roster from the start of last year. And if that all Saudi team actually won a series against like LAT or FaZe at the start of last season, when LAT and FaZe were 2 of the top teams, unquestionably at that time, that's kind of like the parallel here with this C9 win over Gentlemates. Gentlemates just won Major 1, and they're now losing an online series to a brand new team of 4 Challengers players, let alone 4 Challengers players who were getting like top 16, top 24 in Challengers, not even 4 Challengers players who were winning or dominating in Challengers at the time. This is just really unprecedented, and it really, like, I was already mind blown to an extent heading into this matchup with FaZe, and everything that was going on this Friday. This Friday was just a weird day, but yeah, I mean, shout out you for giving me the shout out for mentioning the C9 S&D, because that definitely came to pass here, and I think that's got to be something a little scary for some of these teams. Now, it's also possible that um obviously I haven't like overanalyzed any C9 S&D or any C9 gameplay for that matter. But I feel like it wouldn't be the craziest concept if a new challengers team like this um had some like pretty straightforward S&D strats, or was even like being a little repetitive in their S&D strats, and if like a team just watched a little VOD on them and they were maybe able to catch out some tendencies or something, like I feel like that would be pretty easy to do, and just again, given the state of the Cloud9 team and expectations for them, it would make sense if they were doing some basic stuff that was easy to catch off and catch off guard or whatever. But at the same time, we were talking just last episode about OpTic not even wanting to scrim Cloud9, and some teams clearly weren't taking Cloud9 seriously. You can argue whether they were right to do so or not at that point, but now, given this win over Gentlemates, it feels like it's very possible Gentlemates went into this series with a little ego, and again, rightfully so. They are the Major 1 champions playing against a team that, in many people's eyes, the players aren't even potentially CDL caliber at this exact moment. And C9 was just like, yeah, we don't care what you think. We're gonna pick up a dub here, and it's a huge win for those guys. Really happy for the 4 individuals there and those players picking up a win in this this fashion against this caliber team. And it definitely, at least at the very least, has to put some of these teams on notice, in the sense of, all right, we can't kick our feet up heading into a Cloud9 matchup. Gotta take it a little more seriously than we might have previously. And I just, I think it is interesting that Cloud9 does it by winning 2 search and destroys. Like you said, and like you alluded to, you just don't see a lot of new teams have that kind of success in search and destroy right away, and that's going to be something I continue to look at for Cloud9 throughout these qualifiers.
I don't know if you saw what Sib said after I think it was on his stream. He basically said he had like every excuse. It was like, yeah, like they play weird. We made mistakes. We're trying out new things. The ping was a problem. Like literally every single thing that he could think of to say as to why a team might lose a series, he said that was the reason that they lost this series. So I'm just going to say that C9 just like outplayed them. Like when you have that many things to, try to excuse for your defeat, I think that just means like you kind of got outplayed by a team that you were not expecting to get outplayed by, and your ego is kind of hurt by that, and rightfully so. Like this team, the C9 team, is not good. Like and that's not a shot at those guys. Like they have no experience at this level, and like they're kind of figuring out things as they go. It wasn't like they were a full challengers team before they got brought up, and they're like, they have some kind of chemistry that they've been working on throughout the season. None of that is true. They're just a team. They're just a group of guys that are kind of hopefully going to make a long kind of history in the CDL. But at this point, they're just all really young and inexperienced. And I think Mixion said, ping problem or not, there shouldn't be any chance 4 rookies should be Major 1 winners. And that's 100% true. That is, if you go back in the history of COD esports and you look at, not necessarily even champs winners, but like if you look at the best team in the game, those guys, unless there's something really, really wrong in that match, should not be losing to 4 non-pro players. Like in 2K, 5K, like unless you're getting like DDoSed and there's just like no way to actually play the map, like it just shouldn't happen. Granted, these guys are not just like 4, scrubs off the street or whatever. They're just, messing around with GBs. But yeah, I think that's just crazy that this series went the way it did. And I want to loop in the second Gentlemates match, because it makes it even crazier that it wasn't just like an aberration. It wasn't just Paris lost 1 series and then they bounced back. No, they also got swept in this weekend. They played Toronto, who we should say had their best weekend in a really, really long time. But still, they play Toronto and they get swept 3-0. This was a really tight series that could have gone either way, but we've given Paris that excuse before, or not necessarily excuse, but we've reasoned that like they play some tight series, but they win those series, and that is what you're supposed to do as a good team. Is no matter how close it is, no matter how poorly that you play, you still end up winning those matches 9 out of 10 times, 9.5 out of 10 times. And that was not the case this weekend. They lose to C9, which they shouldn't have, and then they lose to Toronto in this series. It was a 9-point hard point win for the Ultra, a round 11 S&D win for the not the Ultra, the Koi, and then 4-2 Paris, or 4-2 Toronto. They win this series, and yeah, I don't know what to say. Like, do we have to recalibrate our praise for Paris at this point? Are they the best team in the game? How worried should we be, considering not only this kind of inexcusable loss to C9? How do you look at this much more easily excused, I would say, this loss against the Koi, who we know are very talented on paper, but just haven't been able to put it together for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think I think we did bring it up in part when we were talking about the OpTic and not scrimming Cloud9 stuff last episode. But if we didn't, I'll just say it, like, as part of that like day where OpTic was scrimming Cloud9, they also scrimmed Gentlemates, and they went 8-0 map count against both Cloud9 and Gentlemates. And it's always like, I think then Gentlemates scrimmed Falcons, and Gentlemates 8-0'd Falcons in scrims or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I might have the exact, you know, the exact teams and map counts are, no, well, there were a bunch of 8-0s, so the 8-0s aren't wrong, but like the exact order and whatever of all that might be a little off in my memory. But my point here is, like, you hear that and it's just like, okay, well, it's scrims, it is what it is, like, it happened, not a big deal. But now, in the context of that potentially happening before this week, where Gentlemates are, you know, losing to C9 and getting swept by a Toronto team that just also brought in a Challengers player in Kips, the only real thing that like comes to mind for me with Gentlemates is this is a little reminiscent of what happened to them after the holiday break. And we mentioned that during the Major 1 qualifiers with OpTic and Gentlemates, it looked like both OpTic and Gentlemates hit a little bit of a slump after the holiday break when the qualifiers resumed. I think Gentlemates rebounded a little quicker, just in the sense of the qualifiers at least, and then obviously both teams met in the winners finals and grand finals of Major 1 itself. But given like all that and what's happening right now with Gentlemates, like if OpTic and Gentlemates played each other tomorrow, I feel like I would have to pick OpTic.
Oh, definitely.
And that's just, I mean, that's just not where you want to be when it's, you know, Gentlemates in the position they're in, being the Major 1 champions. You want to, no matter what team wins Major 1, you don't want to give anyone any reasons to doubt your championship. You don't want to give anyone reasons to doubt what you've accomplished, or to question if you are the best team, or your status in the hierarchy of the league and all that. So it's just, I really, this series, at least in my eyes, the way I viewed it was that the first two maps in particular, it was like a 30 to 40 point lead at different times throughout the end of the map, that Gentlemates had a 30 to 40 point lead, and they let it slip through their fingers to give Toronto a 9-point win map 1. Then they have a 5-3 lead in the search, and they blow that as well. So potentially goes from a 2-0 series lead for Gentlemates to an 0-2 series whole. And based on that, the blown leads in this series plus the C9, they might have been a little checked. And a little tilted based on everything that happened this weekend, and that the match could have got away from them, and that would go back to what was discussed early in the season, that we kind of refuted. It was the mental state and the chemistry of this potential gentlemate squad when it was being reported and all that stuff, and people were questioning that. Like, maybe that's something we have to consider now more. Is this team gonna get, for lack of a better term, pissed off about losing to some of these teams, and how are they going to respond to these losses? So um really weird spot to be in for Gentlemates and FaZe, given their performances this weekend. Do got to shout out Toronto though for the way they played in this series though. Joe Deceives in particular looking like All-Star Joe again with a 1.22 KD. Kips though 68 kills, tied with Neptune for the most in the series. I still think, haven't seen a ton from him, but based on the limited sample size of him in the CDL, I definitely think he has a bright future in terms of just like his individual performance. And I feel like it's always like there are a lot of times where he just gets off to a hot start and cools off a little bit towards the end of maps. If he's able to like get those hot starts consistently and like carry it out throughout the map, that's really dangerous. But obviously that's um that's something that could come with more time and repetition for him.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think if they could still upgrade their roster at the AR, then they should do that, even with this win streak. But it's obviously very understandable if they feel like they don't need to at this point, with these wins this week, especially. But Paris, like I mean, I don't know what the end result is going to be. I think that's really cloudy at this point. I don't think a roster change is definitely in their future. Not, I'm not saying like right now or anything, but like I said with LAT, like I thought it was super obvious when they signed Kenny, like that a roster change was going to happen in the season. With Paris, it's kind of weird because they win Major One, and they're just not this like they did, like you said, they showed some vulnerability coincidentally in Major One qualifiers against C9. That was the first time that we were like, okay, like what's going on here, because C9 nearly swept them in that time that they played, and then of course this time C9 actually did win this series. The Toronto series is weird. I guess you could, if you want to make an excuse, you could be like, well, Toronto's a lot better now, and we don't really know if Koi is going to be like a competitor like we thought they maybe could be to enter the season. So maybe they're just kind of on the upswing, and we're a little late to it. But there's a lot of things you could say at this point, but I'm pretty worried about Paris, like, and how far and how quickly they could drop out of being true championship contenders. Anything else you got on Paris before we move on?
I don't. I think we're kind of going all over the place. So can we just loop in Toronto's next match as well while we're on them?
So Toronto, that was their second match of the week. Their 3-0 win against Paris. They also played on Saturday. They played Miami, and they also swept that match. 250, 182 hardpoint, 6-4 S&D, 4-2 overload. They played 6 pretty competitive maps, I would say. Like, there wasn't any of their maps this weekend where it was like, okay, like Toronto is just absolutely tearing them apart. They weren't the most dominant, but like to go 6-0 in any week is pretty crazy to think about. And to beat Miami, who very recently beat FaZe Vegas, don't know how much that means anymore, just considering FaZe's play against Boston. Then they beat Paris. Don't know how much we can actually even point to that win, because Paris just lost to C9. So I don't want to take everything away from Toronto, but they do what they're supposed to do what they needed to do, and they win this 3-0. Your thoughts on this match against Miami?
So the big picture thing and why I wanted to loop this in, Toronto obviously goes 6-0, flawless map count in their 2 matches this weekend. And it was after this Miami series that Merck and Nameless both brought it up on the broadcast at different points, how they thought the map set favored Toronto in this Miami matchup in particular, where it was Den for the first 3 maps. Then we look at the Toronto versus Gentlemates matchup. It was Den Hardpoint Scar S&D Den Overload. And I just saw it on the timeline while we were live, and Merck tweeted at 4 o'clock today, so 6 hours ago. According to Merck, 7 of Toronto's 9 map wins in a row have been on Den. Someone will veto it, right? And it got me thinking while you were talking too, and this isn't this isn't gonna be the case unless like the private match is weird in Black Ops 7, but I know this has been something in the past. In the past, there's always a thing where like new teams would be formed, and then whatever that first map that is played in scrims would be like that map that new teams would just get a ton of reps in, and people would like joke that they're really good at it. Obviously, in this game, Blackheart starts with a B, Den is a D. So as long as the game's in alphabetical order, that's not even like a joking possibility here. But it is strange to me that if Merc and Nameless are noticing this, Den is somehow still slipping through the vetoes when clearly it's working out for Toronto. Again, new team, new player in Kips on the squad, so fresh roster, not a ton of data for these other coaches to work with in terms of vetoes up to this point. But now, heading into next week, it will be very interesting to see how much Den is allowed to be played against Toronto if this is like what is actually seems like is happening right now, in the sense of Toronto's just this iteration of Toronto is seemingly really good at Den. And when you have a map like Den that's available in all the modes, that bodes well. We've talked about that with some other teams historically in the CDL, where some teams have an auto veto and it's like a map that's only in for hardpoint, or a map that's only in for like control or CTF. And in World War II, I remember there was the what was the one map, it was like only in for CTF, and I want to say it was like Flak Tower, but I don't think that's the actual name. I can't remember, but like some teams like have like an auto veto like that, where it's just one map on that particular mode, versus when Den's available in all these modes, like it might be a little harder to veto it out against Toronto. So that's something clearly caught the attention of Merck and Nameless on the broadcast. They brought it up. I saw Merck's tweet now. Definitely caught my attention as well. Not going to take anything away from Toronto or anything, but it is kind of interesting to me that it has, it was noticeable enough for those guys, and how these other teams will respond to that. Because now if we go into next week and Den is just the first 3 maps for all of Toronto maps still, then it's like, are these teams paying attention to what's happening, or what's going on? So I would also, counter to that, for a new team like Toronto, even despite the losses or potential result of these matches, it would behoove them as a new roster to get match reps on other maps if they are good at Den, because then you go into the major like, okay, we know we're good at Den, let's try out some of these other maps and figure stuff out, and then that could be a potential recipe for success for them as well. So definitely a very interesting week. I did not have Toronto going 6-0 map count on my bingo card.
Yeah, I think it could just end up being like a Kremplaza situation where with Minnesota, it was like, yeah, I mean, they're really good at this. And we were talking about, like, is anyone actually going to ban this? And then they run into a team that also likes to play on Colossus. Yeah. And then it's like, yeah, you guys are not getting this auto veto, like, out of the series. And I think it might have been OpTic, might have been the team that broke that streak for Minnesota, because that tends to happen. So it could be a situation where Toronto is just kind of like exceptional at this one map, but we'll see as that continues and they play the rest of the CDL, if they're able to keep that up, and if teams do decide to adjust, which we've talked about it before, and you just mentioned it, like some teams, they don't feel like they can veto some of the maps, like, if Den is also one of your best maps, and you might be like, well, we would like to play them on a map that we're good at versus a map that we're not very comfortable at, then in trying to make them uncomfortable, it is like traditional sports too. Teams would like to just, even if it isn't advantageous or they don't have like a necessary advantage over another team in a certain strategy, they would rather just do that because that's something that they're more comfortable and more set in their ways about. So yeah, we'll see what happens with Toronto as they move forward. But again, like this is a good conversation to have with Koi. Like this was not the conversation that we were having just a few weeks ago when they were losing every single match, and we were talking about like maybe drop half the roster is if this season can be salvaged. Like, can you actually save the roster in general? Should Joe DeCeves get traded just to kind of maximize the value that you get back for him? Like that stuff is kind of really deep in the rear view mirror at this point, and that shouldn't be overlooked as we move forward. But yeah, Toronto, they go 6-0 this week. Carolina, we'll talk about their next match because that is also, I want to jump back to Saturday because the first match on Saturday, Falcons versus G2. Yeah, so like Falcons, they have their big win this week, and they beat FaZe, and then they lose to G2, which by the order of operations does make sense because G2 has been wiping FaZe off the map for most of the times that they've played, and Falcons beat FaZe. G2 should beat Falcons as well, and they did, although this was a pretty tight series. Goes to game 5. Falcons, they win the opening hardpoint and a dominant overload. Minnesota win both S&Ds and a pretty decisive Kremplossus hardpoint, as we just mentioned.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a big win for G2, and I wish that we could, like, literally none of these matches have like a great through line. Like there isn't like a, G2 I don't think had like the perfect week by any, or they just played this one map, right? So like this is the only time that we actually get to talk about where like it's not like, and then this happened. Like G2 actually just had like they got in and they got out. They didn't have to go through any bloodbath to get here.
We were on a bit of a roll there, connecting some of these matches.
Yeah.
I honestly forgot about this match, to be completely honest, and I was kind of hyping up Falcons a little bit from the FaZe match. And before we started talking about Falcons FaZe, I thought I scrolled through and like didn't see Falcons anymore, but that's obviously because we both picked G2 to be Falcons, and that was a rare occasion for this week in particular where we both got a match prediction right. So I apologize for any premature gas or anything on the Falcons front. But I mean they did they looked pretty strong in the Scar overload here in this match against G2. Another hard fought map 1 win for Falcons, especially factoring in their close map 1 hard point against FaZe, which was a bit of a comeback from FaZe, but nonetheless they had 2 very, very close map 1s this weekend. It was just the search and destroy was a big difference here for G2. 6-1 in the map 2, and then 6-3 in the game 5, which, in Minnesota tradition, the series had to go to a game 5, but 2 game 5 wins in a row now for G2. I believe that puts them at 3-5 in game 2 or game 5s on the year, because I'm pretty sure they were 1-5 heading into the FaZe game 5 last week or whenever that match was at this point now. Standout thing, though, for me in this series was, especially as you kind of alluded to before this, like talking about Kremplossus, you might want to call it Caesar losses after this map 4 here, where G2 wins 250 to 134, and Krem drops 33 and 26, but Skies goes 34 and 15, so, over a 2 KD. I can probably count on my one hand the number of times Skies has done that in recent years. So shout out to Caesar Skies Bueno investing in his game on Kremplossus. But then we go, Kremplossus for the game 5, and Kremp 12-6 with 6 first bloods. And that's like a Beezy territory in my head, in terms of the amount of times you can see somebody get more than 5 first bloods in an individual map, let alone like across 2 searches. If we go back and look at the scoreboard for map 2, they won 6-1, so I wouldn't be surprised if Kremp had a couple first bloods in there, but I didn't note it down in the notes. The 6 definitely jumped out to me here, which is, you win 6 rounds. You expect to win most rounds where you get first blood. and Kremp's doing a lot of his work there, dropping half of his kills as the first blood, to potentially set the table for G2 to win most of those rounds, presumably. So yeah, I think that's one thing I've said about this G2 team. Regardless of the actual results for them in individual maps and series, just given the people on this team, what we've known from Skies and his like history as a COD player on previous teams, what we've seen from Kremp early in his career, and I mean Estriel and Mamba do their thing as well, but just especially Skies and Kremp being on this team, if I was to say anything at any point heading into the season, I felt like this could be a team that could be dangerous in search and destroy, and at least in this series, that proved to be the case. So maybe this is something, given all the Kremp losses talk and everything like that. Maybe this is just a recipe for success for G2 because they get to a lot of game fives if they can. Capitalize on those game fives by being really good in search, then that only benefits them in the long run.
Yeah, Minnesota this season have played 16 matches according to COD Gamepedia, and 8 of them have gone to Game 5. And like you said, 3-5. They were 1-5 before this little mini win streak that they have going on. That's just crazy to think about. I think I think it's 8 went to Game 5, and then 6, I want to say, are 3-0s either way. And then only 2 of them have actually gone to just 4 maps, which is pretty interesting to think about. But yeah, Minnesota, this is a great win. They need more. Just like right now, they're I think 3-2 in the qualifiers because they didn't play obviously the second match this week, so they didn't get their 6 in. But they just need to kind of keep on this pace. Like they're able to beat FaZe pretty consistently. I think they're 3-1 against FaZe. Granted, we just don't know what FaZe is at this point, but Falcons had just beaten FaZe, and Falcons have been they had been on a 3-match win streak as well coming in. So there's just a lot of good here for G2. Again, I think they're probably the most pleasant surprise of the season, even to this point. I know that they've had some downs and haven't been like perfect by any means, but the fact that I'm pretty sure they're 4th in the qualifier standings at this point is a very good thing for this team, and should bode well as they, I would assume, get like an easier schedule in the back half of these qualifiers because they've had some really tough outings over the first few weeks. So hopefully it does get a little bit easier for them. Falcons, it is what it is. Like if you went in this week, like you want 1-1, and I think you'd be happy with that. It just probably isn't the 1-1 that you had probably imagined on how it would go. But otherwise, a very entertaining match overall for that series. We talked about Toronto, Miami. Next up was Vancouver and Carolina on Saturday. This series went, about as expected, unless you were Justin Binkowski and you were swearing off the Carolina Royal Ravens. Carolina, this is like their most decisive win since the Major 1 qualifiers. So, it's been a month or so since but like you would kind of expect this. I know Vancouver has had some pretty good moments more recently. You have been on the Lurks bandwagon, and I think he had like a pretty good series overall. It's just the team did not really have that great of a series. It was a 3-0 win for the Royal Ravens, and Carolina, they are looking all right. Like they don't look like they are completely an abject failure or anything. Like it doesn't seem like they're gonna miss Major 2 by any means. They're probably not at the point that we thought they were, where they could be major contenders entering Major 1. But this is not a bad spot for them. What did you think of this match?
Yeah, I just went back to look for it because I don't see it anymore for TJ, but I thought I favorited his tweet after this matchup, and I'm assuming he deleted it. Yeah, he did because um, Beans replied to it, and I saw that. But like TJ tweeted something to the effect of, "I'm sure that was a real series I just played," or something like that. And Beans replied to the Bermuda Triangle, like kind of alluding to the Carolina players being spread out and that potentially having a impact on the ping and everything for the server. So might have been some online cheese going on in this matchup. But regardless of that, I mean, based on the Carolina we saw when Exceed first came into the lineup, you would expect Carolina to take care of business against this Vancouver team. Heading into this week, two very winnable matches for them on paper against Vancouver and Boston, especially with Boston playing their first match with Spart. Um, so in terms of Carolina having aspirations of doing well at Major 2 and even qualifying for Major 2, these were essentially two must-win matches, and they did take care of business in that regard. But yeah, pretty underwhelming performance from Vancouver. I should have listened to you. You outlined it with the numbers, saying like, the 3 losses, then a win for Vancouver and stuff. I got greedy and went for the Vancouver double dip on a win, and it just didn't happen. I will say, you mentioned Lurks playing well in this series. I think in both series for Vancouver this weekend, I thought Gwyn played a little more in line with what we've seen from him in previous years, especially in the OpTic series to end today. But Lunars was the one who didn't, I was gassing him up a little bit on the last few episodes. He kind of struggled a little bit in these matches, so that'll be something to keep an eye on for me in terms of Vancouver's upcoming games.
Did you happen to look to see who Vancouver's match would be if they continue their pattern and they win 2 matches from now?
Can't be OpTic, but if you say FaZe, it'd be really funny.
No, it is the Paris Gentlemates. So, all right. So, just watch out. Like they play 2 this week. They play C9 in their first match, and they play Paris in their second match. I'm just saying, like,
I don't know who I'm picking at Vancouver C9.
You're gonna get a few days to think about it. Sit on it. Maybe talk to some kind of religious leader and get some guidance as you go down this journey. But yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. Yeah, Vancouver. I just want to say, when you've only won like 3 matches all season, you cannot talk shit about onliners. Like, you just literally cannot. Like, if OpTic lost to Carolina and it was like Bermuda Triangle, I'm like, all right, I get it. Like, that makes sense. But when you're TJ and you're going double negative and your team is like 3-10 to start the year, like, you don't have that right. Like, we should have like second class citizens in the CDL where they get to just make certain excuses about why they lose, and Vancouver has not earned the right to make any excuses about why they lose matches, like, at any point. So I don't want to hear it from any of those Surge players about losing to Carolina. But this next match was, I thought, this was the one that we were looking forward to. I think the entire CDL was always looking forward to it. It did not make a ton of sense why they didn't go on last. It still doesn't, considering how the last match ended. But on Saturday, the final match was OpTic versus LAT, the HBR Classic. We split our picks here. You went with LAT, I went with OpTic. And I think there were some pretty good reasons to go either way here. The first map was just a barn burner, 250-238. The Thieves win. Mercules probably has like one of his worst respawn maps of the season. And like, he goes 23-30. I mean, by MVP standards, that is below par. But then Merc has a ninja, and I'm sure that you were completely torqued up by that in the S&D. That Merc ninja is obviously like, if that's kind of like when they think of Heisman moments, that is an MVP moment that they could play in the montage at the end of the season. And then OpTic, they win that S&D, they win the overload, they decisively win the second hard point of the series. And I think this is the expected outcome for most people. OpTic have been just looking like white hot as of late. LAT, like Miction said, and like how we had been talking about it, LAT really hadn't played anybody solid to this point with Neum. They had been able to win the matches that they were, set out, and that's what they're supposed to do, but they had not been tested very much to this point. I think it's good that they won that opening hardpoint. That should be like a pretty good moral victory for LAT, considering they've struggled at times being competitive with the top teams, although they did beat OpTic in the Major 1 qualifiers. You could also argue that OpTic was not a top team when they played them because they were losing a bunch of those matches. So there's a lot to kind of break down here, but what do you think of this series?
They were joking on the desk after the match about should LAT have just subbed in Kenny to play against OpTic, because Kenny obviously had a pretty, he had like a 1.3 KD against OpTic in their matchup earlier this year when LAT beat OpTic in the Major 1 qualifier. I just saw your comment and lost full. Oh, I'm gonna regain. All right. So yeah, that was a funny thing to joke about them, potentially considering subbing in Kenny just to play OpTic or whatever. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but was funny to joke about in that regard. But overall for this series, and going back to what Mixon said in the YouTube chat earlier about Neum like not being tested or anything like that, I would agree with that point. But I've said it a couple times now for LAT over the course of this current iteration of the roster. He is just in a position where he just has to do his job, and as long as those 3 other superstars alongside him are performing up to the potential that they have shown multiple times throughout their careers, Neum just has to like be serviceable, and this LAT team should be good. In this series in particular, Scrap was otherworldly in map 1, went 36 and 28, and I was sitting there like, damn, Scrap's absolutely popping off. And then he ends up finishing the series with a 0.79 KD, which is the lowest KD of the whole series, and maybe the lowest KD Scrap has ever had in a series. I don't know if that's actually factually true or not, but
check that Champs Grand Finals. That's going to be the one.
Yeah. I can't think of many other times where Scraps had a 0.79 KD before. Like, that just hasn't really happened to my recollection, at least. On the flip side, Merc has a 0.85 KD for this series, the only negative KD on OpTic, and you could argue maybe that's one of his worst performances statistically in his small pro career. And OpTic's still able to get a win against a team like LAT. Like we have highlighted throughout this season, other players on OpTic struggling at points and Merc picking up the slack for them. This was the inverse of that in this series, where literally all 3 other players on OpTic went positive, and Merc got to, kick his feet up for a change and get carried by the boys a little bit. So that was an interesting development in this sense, that I feel like now, especially with this match happening in the way that it did, at least from a statistical standpoint, it's pretty safe to say there have been series for this OpTic team where the team has won despite one individual player struggling at different times and it being a different player at different times. So that's just something like that speaks to the talent on OpTic's team, obviously, but it's also like, again, I think we said it. I can't remember what team we were talking about, but it's sort of like, if that's something that's happening and you're still picking up the wins, obviously that's good. But then just imagine if there aren't those series and everyone is just clicking and firing on cylinders at the same time. That's a really scary proposition, especially OpTic now. We'll get to their later match later in the day. 6-0 in these Major 2 qualifiers, looking to be, barring another, little bit of a mini slump towards the end of the qualifiers, which we did see in the Major 1 qualifiers after the holiday break. Barring something like that happening again, they seem poised to be the number 1 seed heading into Major 2.
Yeah, I think this series was the best example of the difference between OpTic and LAT, in the sense that, like you said, Neum does not have to be a superstar on this team. He just has to be consistent. He has to be like somebody that they can rely on to like just do his job. At times, Kenny was a little too volatile. Like, he could pop off. I think against OpTic, for example, in the Major 1 qualifiers, he had a really great series, but that was not a consistent thing. So they couldn't get used to like what he was actually going to provide. Neum, doesn't have to be that unless he has, if he's just consistent, they can win a lot of matches. But what I will say is that this is the biggest difference between OpTic and LAT is when OpTic's best player, Mercules, has a bad series, there's more than enough talent on the rest of the team to just make up for Mercules' bad series. Like you said, this could potentially be his worst series as a pro. Obviously, that's only been 9 months, but still, this was probably, it was one of his worst at the very least. Yeah. And yet they still won this series 3-1 against a pretty talented team. I would say a very talented team. But LAT is significantly less talented overall than OpTic at this point because Scrappy, the best LAT player, most likely, I mean, he's the reigning MVP or whatever, but if you want to say Hydra or whatever, I think it's 1A, 1B. There's very little difference when they're both at their best. But when Scrappy, the worst player on LAT, has a bad series, there's not enough talent on LAT overall at this point to make up for Scrappy's bad series and actually win this match against OpTic. So that's how I would kind of frame it. That's what I think about in terms of this series. And we've talked about that with some of these top teams like OpTic, for example, when, if Shotzi has a bad series, and he's had plenty of them, or Dashy has a bad series, or Hook has had his fair share of bad series over the years, but they just have so much talent that they're able to win the matches regardless of that one bad performance because the other three are just lights out. And LAT just doesn't have that luxury at this point. Maybe there is something that ends up happening where Neum pops off and he kind of unlocks a new level as he gets more comfortable in the CDL. That's happened certainly before. Maybe a BZ kind of turns back the clock a little bit. Hydra kind of steps up his game. There are some things that can happen for LAT where it could be potentially possible for the Thieves to win a match like this, despite Scrappy not having his best series. But that just wasn't the case here. And I mean, that's just that's kind of the crazy thing about OpTic is that they have so much talent to kind of spread around that it's going to be hard to beat them in any 5-game series, which is even crazier how they end up losing multiple matches in a row. It doesn't make sense when that happens, but they're on a win streak here, and they continued it. This was the last match that we saw today on Sunday was them against Vancouver. That was a pretty obvious pick. Both of us didn't even really think about it. I think it was maybe a little bit closer of a series for Vancouver than their first one, which maybe goes back to the Carolina was even maybe more decisive in their win against OpTic, especially that overload. But yeah, this was a pretty straightforward 3-0 win for OpTic against Vancouver. Did you have anything that stood out about this series?
I did. The only thing I didn't get to say about the OpTic LAT series was Merc had a ninja defuse in the map 2. Hydra threw a smoke down on the bomb to get the plant down, and Merc just instantly jumped into the smoke and defused right away as soon as Hydra got off the bomb. So obviously shout out Merc regardless of the statistical performance in that matchup. Shout out for the ninja. We always shout out ninjas on the Ego Chall podcast. But yeah, going into there also was the funny joke in the overload. There was Hydra got a 3-piece and potentially looked like he was gonna lead in LAT for a potential game tying score. I think it was 3-2 in the overload at this point, and Hydra went to throw a nade towards OpTic spawn because he had just killed them, so it would have landed where they spawned and potentially weakened them, softened them to but before they got to defend the point. And a rogue trophy system not only blocked the nade, but killed Hydra. And I think it was Maven joking about calling it the OpTic trophy, comparing it to the OpTic van way back in the day for the OG fans. So that was two funny things that happened in that series, regardless of all the numbers and the end result there. But yeah, for the OpTic Vancouver match, end of the day, like you said, pretty straightforward. I do think at least in terms of a silver lining for me from this whole weekend for Vancouver was I just thought Gwen, his name was sticking out a little bit more on the scoreboard to me. This weekend from Gwen for me, it's not eye-popping numbers or anything like that, but it's sort of more in line with what we saw from Gwen in the past. And especially in this series, it felt like one of his other Carolina-esque matches where like he was the only guy doing anything and his other three teammates were struggling a bit. And that's kind of what the box score reflects in this series, even though Gwen has a .97, Abe has a .66, TJ .69, and Lunars with a .78. So overall, it was fairly straightforward 3-0 victory for OpTic. Shout out Hook for the 1.54. Um, you know, people like to forget about Hook the Nuke and what he can do, and that's just also I think looping in with the LAT way we broke that down and everything like that. Like the Hook the Nuke's still a lethal weapon, and some people might forget that, and that they forget at their own risk.
Yeah, Easy Money Baby in the YouTube chat said Hook might be the best player right now, and I mean today's series kind of proves that, does it not? Like the fact that he can pop off like that and just lead them to a win pretty easily. It kind of says quite a bit. The only other match that we haven't talked about, right, is Miami versus the C9 New York, and obviously we talked about C9 at the top of the show and how they had that incredible win, and then they followed up with probably the most lopsided win of the weekend for any team. Like this was like Miami didn't look to be in too much danger at any point during this series. It was a nearly 170 point hard point win, 6-3 S&D, 6-3 overload. Miami got in, got out, and was like, all right, like we're good to go. This is kind of over. So what did you think?
This was honestly the series that I watched the least of this weekend.
To be expected.
And today, what'd you say?
No, to be expected. Neither of these teams have looked great or at least solid.
And not only that, I mean, this match happened right when dinner arrived. Dad went out and then picked up Chinese for dinner tonight, so I was eating that. And coincidentally, Cloud9 was playing in the LCS finals for the split championship in League of Legends, and we were joking about this before going live. Gonna tie it in here, even though some of our audience might not really, care or know too much about League of Legends, but Cloud9 was pretty dominant in League of Legends so far in North America up to this point in the season. They had a pretty strong run through the winners bracket, and we're playing in the finals today against a team called Lion, which I said to Preston beforehand he probably hadn't even heard of, and they do have some solid players on that team. One of the most recent MVPs from North America, as well as a former Cloud9 Korean ADC who went over to Korea and now is coming back to North America. But all that aside, I was watching that at the time of this match, and Cloud9 ended up losing in the finals of this League of Legends match. And according to the LCS broadcast, it was the first time that a team successfully went through the lower bracket to beat a winner bracket team in the finals in LCS history. That was kind of shocking for me to hear in real time. But it also, to tie it in with the CDL, I am just sitting here wondering, is Jack going to ask his potential, top NA team in League of Legends to take a pay cut in order to remain on the roster, similar to what happened with the underperforming CDL team earlier this year? Most likely not going to happen, but yeah.
I mean, I did make the joke in the pre-show, and I'll make it again. Maybe he'll just pay their rent for 1 month and be like, "I'll cut you loose." I guess we'll see. I did also make the joke in our text message that like they had to sacrifice something for C9 beating Paris earlier in the week. So maybe Jack should not be playing with those voodoo dolls nearly as much.
And that's what I think it's safe to tie in here in terms of like you talking about how this was a pretty convincing series, one that, not a lot of expectations for or anything. This is what most people, and rightfully so, were expecting to happen when Gentlemates played Cloud9. Just a 3-0 series that we didn't talk about at all. And it's a series that, in part, because of what also happened with Gentlemates out of Toronto, that we ended up talking about it for 20-ish, 15-ish minutes on this episode. Not something I had on my bingo card as well. So just a very weird week overall in the CDL, especially, Toronto beats Miami 3-0. Miami's able to 3-0 Cloud9 though, but then Cloud9 3-0's General Mates, who also got 3-0'd by Toronto. Or sorry, Cloud9 didn't 3-0 General Mates, but still, they beat them 3-2. I don't know. You throw in the FaZe stuff. The only thing that really makes sense is OpTic. Looking like OpTic right now, and maybe that even is scary in terms of what that could mean, because if you're a Debbie Downer in any sense, you could be like, oh well, all these other teams are hitting slumps now. Does this just set an OpTic up to fail later or hit a slump later, or you look half class full? It's just like, nah, OpTic's just too dominant at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just go through the standings real quick, but they have like a very clear path to the number one seed. They did in the Major One qualifiers, and then it went off the rails. So they still have 5 matches to go in these qualifiers. So there's no guarantee that they'll make it, but they certainly have the path. They're right now they're in first place by themselves with a 6-0 record. They've won 18 of their 22 maps. They have the highest map win percentage as well. In second place is LAT, so their only losses to OpTic. They're 4-1, and they've won 72% of their maps, which only OpTic and LAT have more than 55% map win percentage in these qualifiers to this point, mostly because Paris just pooped down their leg for the entire week, and they tanked both their map and their match win percentage. They are tied for third place with 4 other teams, I want to say. Paris, G2, Falcons, Toronto, and Carolina, they all have 3 wins in these qualifiers, but Paris and G2 are 3-2 as opposed to Falcons, Toronto, and Carolina. They are all 3-3 in these qualifiers. And then you have Miami, FaZe, and Boston are all on 2 wins. Miami right now would be ahead because they're 2-3 versus FaZe and Boston. They are 2-4 on.
Boston should be ahead.
Yeah, I guess they should. But yeah, that's crazy to think about, that those 3 teams are right now like near the bottom of the standings, and the 2 teams that you would expect to be at the bottom, Vancouver and Cloud9, excuse me, they are both 1-4, tied for 11th place. So those right now, Vancouver and C9, if the qualifiers ended today, they would not even go to Major 2, and then you'd have like Boston, FaZe, Miami, and Carolina in that play-in bracket, which would be really kind of interesting to think about, because Carolina just looked horrible at Major 1. FaZe obviously lost their first match of Major 1, so who knows if they would come out and lay an egg in that play-in bracket. But again, everybody has at least 5 matches to go in these qualifiers, multiple weeks to kind of figure things out. And we'll be here for all of those matches. We will be talking about them every week. We'll be back on Wednesday, most likely, to talk about the upcoming matches, the 4th week of the CDL. We have an LAT FaZe match and an OpTic FaZe match that is very, very interesting to discuss when we get to that. But yeah, please like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can watch it live, the stream that we do on Sundays and Wednesdays usually. You can watch those live, or you can watch the VODs after the fact. We're also on Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can follow and or subscribe on the Twitch channel. You can also follow and subscribe to Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. Follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast tour is at Ego Chall Podcast. And now that I just said all that, I should just say the pick'em because I completely forgot about that. Yeah, so you completely stunk it up, mostly because of the Carolina fiasco, but you went 3-8. I went 6-5. This is one of our worst weeks, and
definitely
quite a bit.
My worst week ever.
I think we had a little bit of a rough stretch to start this season when we were still figuring out the teams, but this has been a rough one. I'm 60-33 on the season, and you are 56-37. And fortunately, you're not last because Trimmer is still winless. So
thank you, Trimmy.
Yep. So yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys so much as always for all the support. Really appreciate it. And we shouted you guys out throughout the episode, but one more time, just for the sake of making sure I hit everybody, shout out Hobalicious, Veruz mentions Justin Pace. And Alex Toma. I don't think I missed anybody, but shout out everybody who was popping off in the YouTube chat today. Really appreciate it. Love having episodes like this where we got people stopping by in the YouTube chat and giving us even more stuff to talk about and interact with you guys on. So that was really fun. But yeah, like Preston said, should be live at some point midweek this week to discuss next weekend's matches. They're also something we didn't mention. OpTic tweeted tonight. There's some news dropping tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central, and the picture for said news was Shotzi wearing a suit. So seems like pretty clear rage bait to me, but there are some people speculating on some potential uh, serious news from Shotzi. I don't think that's likely, but I guess we'll find out tomorrow, and most likely we will be live later in the week after that to see what the deal was and everything along those lines. So really crazy week this week. A lot of stuff that was unexpected, and I think we did a pretty good job of breaking it all down and having some good combos around it. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Appreciate all the support once again, and see you on the next one. Remember to send the chow.